All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another MassMedic webinar. Today, we are talking about HealthGPT, benefits, risks, and effective uses of generative AI in medtech. And I'm pleased to present this webinar today from Greenberg Traurig. If you haven't met me, I'm Anna King, Marketing Coordinator at MassMedic. And if you're not familiar with our organization, we're a membership-based trade association for the medical device industry, and we work to promote our ecosystem in New England through connection, education, events like this, advocacy, and awareness. I do have a quick housekeeping note before I turn it over to our presenters. This webinar is being recorded, so all registrants will receive the recording after the presentation. And we're also allocating some time for a Q&A, so make sure to put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to AJ Tibbetts from Greenberg Traurig. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for having us. So I'm joined today by Eli Goldberg, the VP of Data Science at Current Health, for this exciting talk. Eli and I have been talking about generative AI for months now, and would love to share some of our thoughts with you today. Start off with just brief introduction to Eli and to myself. Eli, love to have you share a little bit about your background and about Current Health.
Sure. My name is Eli Goldberg. I'm the VP of Data Science at Current Health. Current Health was recently acquired by Best Buy Health, which is owned by Best Buy, about 16 plus months ago for around $400 million. The purpose of Current Health is really and Best Buy Health is really to enable care at home for everyone. So we have a platform that integrates with a series of best-in-class medical devices, some of which we produce on our own. And our job is a big one, but it's no less than trying to enable care at home. So for acute care populations, for post-discharge populations, and for chronic populations, we have a really, I think, elegant opportunity to shift the side of care and to change the last mile of healthcare. I think there's really incredible opportunities in remote patient monitoring and monitoring people these days. The question is, okay, do you want to be a tech company or do you want to deliver care? And so I think Current Health is, a significant weapon in the fight of cost and the fight of clinical opportunity in an increasingly competitive and critical space. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Exciting. Hear your thoughts today on this topic, including from that background with Current Health and with your past experience. I'm AJ Tibbetts. I'm an attorney with Greenberg Traurig in the Life Sciences and Medical Technology Group. My particular area of focus is digital health. I was a software developer at the start of my career. I have a background in computer science, but have been an attorney for 17 years now, working in intellectual property with companies focused on AI, digital health, and a number of other things. I'm with Greenberg Traurig. We're a big law firm, but our tagline is Big Law Redefined. Our backstory, our history, where we came from is unlike any other large law firm, and so we are still unlike any other large law firm. We focus on being flat, hierarchically distributed decision-making and empowering each individual client team rather than having any sort of off-the-shelf GT way that we represent clients. And so every client's team is empowered for flexible budgeting, creative solutions, and meeting the client where they are at with their particular business needs. So full flexibility in every way, every dimension with our client work. And so that makes us different in addition to our carbon neutral offices, our commitment to diversity that goes back 5 decades, and commitment to pro bono community service up to housing Ukrainian refugees with our European attorneys. So excited to be with my colleagues at Greenberg Traurig, including in our Life Sciences and Medical Technology Group. We're full service for life sciences companies. I'm in the intellectual property group, but have a lot of colleagues in the regulatory side, reimbursement side, corporate M&A, et cetera. Those are the experiences we'll be drawing on today to talk a little bit about generative AI.
Yeah. So first of all, I was like a former client and now like friends with a lot of GT folks. You guys are great. Look, I think generative AI is really interesting. It's super hot. People who have been in this space, I think, were shocked when sort of ChatGPT exploded. But this technology goes back a really long way. So I thought it would be interesting for folks to just sort of start with a bit of a high level. What is it? and then do a really sort of brief tiptoe through the tulips, a whistle-stop tour of some of the highlights, development highlights, just to also make sure folks are on the same page, but just to really highlight, look, this stuff is really accelerating. And that acceleration is going to create a bit of interesting shear that I think we should talk about.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see come up a lot. Is people, it's obviously hot right now over the past 6 months. It's getting lots of headlines, but this is stuff that goes back decades, including in medtech.
So I thought I'd start with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek comedy, as is my way. And I asked GPT-4, like, how would you describe generative AI to a room full of executives in a few bullets? And actually, I'm pretty impressed with these results. And I think this isn't a joke. Like, I think this is a fairly good summary. So in these 5 bullet points, I want to talk about the first 3 as a bucket and the last 2. Look, it's advanced ML. It's deep learning that enables us to generate, hence generative AI, human-like content. That's text, that's images, that's audio, that's video. But increasingly, the way that we interact with software in the world is text, right? Like code is text. And so
the speech that's then turned into text.
Exactly. So, I think that, the opportunity here to interact with this thing as a human and to generate human-like content is really remarkable. It's generating code, text to UI, text to, image, text to video. And I think the opportunity here to do a lot more with less is really remarkable. It's trained on data. There's a lot of different data approaches. ChatGPT is, uniquely a human reinforcement learning model, and it's trained with human input, which I think gives it a very human feel, and I think helps it cross that uncanny valley in terms of are you talking to something artificial? But there's other aspects too, other ways that generative AI works, and we'll sort of briefly talk about it. And of course, you can make almost anything, right? So the nice part about particularly the large transformer approaches these days is that you kind of strip away the ends of these models, and you can force this output to look like anything, look like video, look like text, look like image. And I think we're going to probably see this transecting into mechanics and biology. So we'll have core systems that are then related to inputs, not so dissimilar to a human. Now, these last 2 I think are important, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on them. But there's a lot of nervousness. A lot of software engineers at the end of their training who are like, oh, do I need to do this? A lot of, already the market is flush with software engineers. This, took a killing this year. But I think at least this model seems to philosophically think that it's going to be enhancing human productivity. And I think that's really the focus of this discussion, is the relationship between these models' ability to do stuff and the clinical context under which we ask it to do something. So I really hope that we're enhancing human productivity.
There's a tagline I hear a lot, and I think exactly as you said, we'll come back to this a couple of times today, is AI is not going to be replacing people, at least in the long term. It's people who are leveraging AI are going to be replacing people who are not leveraging AI, because it can help supplement and augment.
Yeah. Agree. And, I think a lot of folks are like, oh, we have 100 software engineers now. What do we, what will that look like? What if they go down to 10? And I think it's actually probably more like we want those 100 software engineers to look like 1,000. And so, maybe in the short term, the nature of work may change. And certainly we've got a bit of a mass balance issue we need to reconcile about what jobs look like in the future. But I think productivity enhancement is kind of the name of the game, and also ethics, right? Like the, deep fakes, fake news, these things that every science fiction novel out there kind of postulates destabilizes our world. It turns out totally right. And so, outside of the Harry Seldon universe, there's serious ethical considerations that, we need to think and talk about. And of course, healthcare has got to be number one in folks' minds thinking about it.
I'm always up for a foundation reference.
Good
book for anyone out there. But
So super quick overview. And AJ, I don't know if you want to split this up with me, because I'm sure folks are already tired of hearing me talk. But every AI discussion typically starts with Alan Turing, who really set that North Star of what does it mean for artificial intelligence and the ability to mimic human intelligence. I think we may have gotten there. Maybe we'll need another test. But that was the 40s, and the 50s saw the birth of the mathematical model mimicking human neurons, the neural networks. 60s saw the first chat model. And then, in the 80s plus, there's a lot of really big architectural improvements that they're already here. We're already using these types of machine learning and AI to do things like heart failure prediction and disease progression, in a radiological sense, to determine cancer and prognosis. If you're wearing an Apple Watch and you're interested in the human activity recognition, LSTMs or how they do that, and the intersection of our commonplace when machine learning looks really good, when AI looks really good, it just integrates into our life seamlessly. And so just thinking a little bit about what that means, on the other side of the software is the hardware. So the question of like, okay, why now? Well, we have the right data structures, we have the right ability to query this data, we have the right systems to make it accessible and trainable, we've got the right modalities of training, we have the right, even GPUs and ability to distribute the learning across like these giant computing systems. Like there's a lot of development that goes into it. So the why now is pretty remarkable. I think ChatGPT, GPT-4 is trained on something 1 trillion parameters. That's only 6x smaller than a human brain. And so, look, do I think it's going to mimic human brain? I don't know. We're going to be uploading our consciousnesses into the matrix. Well, maybe. But I think in terms of thinking a little bit about what's philosophy and what's not, I think we're on the bubble.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways from this slide is one, it goes back decades, AI goes back decades, but AI in healthcare goes back decades, and not necessarily the generative piece, right? Because that's what's become really hot in the last couple of months is creating something new, which isn't necessarily always the focus of healthcare, right? For radiology, we're not trying to create a new image, we're trying to see what the patient looks like. But the arrow bullet points in here going back into these technologies have existed. They have a place, they have a current place, they've had a place. And we're talking about what are the ways in which we can continue to grow from here as these technologies grow. We have this slide on the last couple years of development and how things have started to change and why these headlines are coming.
Yeah.
Now.
So, these time spaces are getting much more close together, right? And I think the generative movement in many ways kicked off with generative adversarial networks from Ian Goodfellow. So, GANs are remarkable. It's not the way ChatGPT was trained. It's not the way these language models are trained. It's two networks, one typically used to make fake data and the other used to determine if that data is fake. And you might think, how could that be used in healthcare? Well, it's great image processing, denoising techniques. And if you've ever watched like CSI Miami, where they're like, enhance, like GANs can be used to do things like super resolution, which
everybody's been saying for years that's stupid. It doesn't exist. Now it does.
Yeah, no, it does. Haha. So, I think the integration of this tech with traditional med tech and, the physics of monitoring and the physics of engaging with humans, I think we're going to see that mesh in an interesting way. Driving into 2017, the transformer was really, I guess, the gear shift in model size, but also in, let's say, interaction applicability. And, the transformer is nice because you can fine tune it. You can strip off the ends and kind of make, the inputs and outputs look like whatever you have. But, these things are already, been used since 2017 to do things like medical coding and, predicting the next event that you're going to have or the next diagnosis or your prognosis or medical note summarization. And honestly, they weren't like amazing with it. And, I think architecture and size of these networks is really the big thing, the size, the scale, the data, how they're trained that really change their performance. I've
been working with companies for years that, put microphones into patient exam rooms and then listened to what was going on, captured the interaction, and then spit out a medical note automatically. Importantly, for the doctor to then review for accuracy. Yeah. But to your point that, it's not a perfect solution, but these things have been used and are coming. Yeah.
And I think they're going to get better. Yeah. Right. And then the nature of what it is that we need may change. Mm-hmm. So, GPT, the first version of GPT was in 2018. And there's competitors out there that are different, that look, actually some of the architectures I would argue were better than the GPT approach. But they just had a really great way to train it. On the other side of things are generative sort of image creation. Recently, Stable Diffusion as a technique has really gained a lot of popularity. OpenAI's DALL-E model and like Midjourney are really incredible opportunities to create things, create medical data. Not that can be really useful, but creating images and faces, creating training data and other stuff. Like there's really incredible opportunities. And even getting AI headshots these days is like very in. I have some, they don't look that great, but like that's just me and my face and all the other things. So, but I think, generative AI is It's been around, but it's just getting really exciting and really accessible now.
Right. So we've talked a lot about the technologies, what they can be used for, but I don't want to have a conversation just about the tech in the abstract. I think it's rather than talk about the, if you will, solutions in search of a problem, let's talk about the healthcare system and what are some of the challenges facing the healthcare system that could be potentially addressed with AI? Where's a good role for it as opposed to just in the abstract?
Yeah.
What are some things that you can throw at the wall? What are some problems that we could potentially address?
Yeah, I think these sort of three fronts in this war, so to speak, are really critical. And I think we should like reframe and think about these things in the right way. The first is, I know there's a lot of people out there who are worried about jobs and positions, and certainly these like macro and microeconomics are super important. I don't want to ignore that. But look, healthcare is undersupplied, right? We have some of it, we want more of it. Of the good subset of things we should do, we can only really ever afford to do a smaller subset. Like most of the US population has healthcare, thankfully, not everybody. It's attached to the nature of your work and your job and other interesting things. And oh yeah, by the way, even being able to access healthcare is secondary to actually being able to receive it. So we have, we're undersupplied in nurses, we're undersupplied in doctors. And actually, if you're doing clinical research, we're actually undersupplied in patients. And so, I think discussing and opening up and framing the problem that way, look, there's a lot of good that we can do, and we should all really think about how to embrace and address these issues in the right way. The second thing is, look, if you've ever tried to sell something into the healthcare system, right, like either you're paying for care, you're paying and delivering care, you're delivering care, you're making drugs, you're a vendor, like those five like entities within the healthcare space, they all use software, and it's kind of like not all great. Like, let's just be really honest. There is a long-term undersupply of software, and these tools and techniques are really incredibly important for accelerating the decrease or the increase of this supply. Every year we cannibalize like the bottom 10 to 20% of software anyway. But, I think there's just a really remarkable opportunity here to accelerate the time between identifying a critical problem and closing that critical problem with software. And the expectations on the healthcare system are going to change, right? And like you said, I think the people who are embracing these technologies will outcompete those who do not. And finally, I think
we're not going to have fewer nurses. We can't have fewer nurses. We're going to have, more nurses be more productive.
Exactly. And probably have a better job, like what the job that they wanted to do rather than this like administrative struggle. And on that, I think, and for those folks who know me, that, they may be tired of me saying things like this, but I think it's true. Like the largest barrier to adoption in healthcare is the business case. And data science can be used to bend the business case. These technologies can be used to bend the business case, but without an ROI, you have no product. And even if it took 10 seconds as opposed to 10 years to develop software, you still have to test it. Like the fundamental purpose of these things is to improve human life. And the degree to which you do that is still really important. So credible measurement, clear like value propositions, they're not going away.
Right.
And so I think the focus on the technology is where big folks like Amazon and Google have failed. They think, hey, with enough software engineers, I can eat the world. Actually, no, you can't. Like, you really need to understand the business of healthcare. And so I think it may decrease the need for such heavy, over-engineered software organizations. And I think it will open up opportunity for us to really think about the business case and how it really helps or doesn't. So
yeah. Well, we'll come back to each one of these three, but on that point, we have the model that works in Silicon Valley of move fast and break things and just develop your user base over a long term without profitability, which, as you said, there are famous examples over the past 10 years of it just screeching to a halt when it hits the healthcare system with a different set of performance indicators. So. You
know what I really hate as like a term? I really hate like the word disrupt. Like I hear a lot of people say like, oh, it's disrupt healthcare. Like, why would you want to do that?
You ask most people about disruption, and this came up, every day in politics 10 years ago. People don't want it to change.
Yeah.
People also see struggles all the time, but they don't want it overhauled.
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to see the focus change, but I don't want to see care disrupted. And maybe I'm just being like persnickety, but
yeah.
So just to introduce this thing, I wanted to healthcare is undersupplied, and I wanted to kind of put a fine point on it. We don't have to watch this whole thing, but earlier this year, we had nurses striking in the street in Mount Sinai and Montefiore in New York. Mount Sinai is a critical hospital. It's like something like 1,200 beds. It's a trauma center. It's like a safety net in many ways for people of New York. And let's listen to this young woman discuss how serious the nurse issue is.
I'm going to try to.
What up, Nurse Gang? What up, TikTok? So, looks like it's getting. Who said I'm ready to get my red scrubs and go stand on the line with them. I understand why they out there now. Let's take a deeper look into what's going on. Strike nurse just posted this today. Just quit strike assignment after day 1 here in New York. Not worth it. 1 to 23 nurse patient ratios in the ER. Let's take a deeper look at what some of the nurses are saying. One of the nurses hit me up and she said, girl, I'm a strike nurse inside and it's a complete shit show. Now I know why they are striking. 37 patients.
So, on the top part of her things, and like nurse to patient ratio is like 1 to 23. If she's talking about 37 to 3, it's like 12-ish to 1, a little bit more. Bad. Right. And I think in terms of the things that nurses do, healthcare is not an online service, but there are definitely critical aspects this woman brings up that I think are ripe for generative AI to make an impact that I think we should all think and care about. There are people whose care is impacted by the strike. And I know nurses care about people. They knew exactly what they were doing when they were striking and the impact that it was going to make. But there were dangerous levels of a dangerous undersupply of nurses in this area. And so, she goes on to talk about how she, when it goes off on somebody because she couldn't hang blood or give medicines because she didn't have access, and like that's the state of Medtech inside a hospital is, you've got strike nurses. Okay, cool. Like I get it. They're from out of town. But the reality is it shouldn't take an army to give people access. And even things like access or engagement, validating credentials, like doing triage, a lot of these things I think are parts of a nurse's career that they don't even want. They don't like those things. They want to get to the business of caring. And I think generative AI and approaches to help take away the administrative burden, I think are really important. I think we need to focus on them in the right way. Are we going to get rid of nurses? Yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
But we might get rid of some of the worst parts of the job to let them focus on what it is that they actually fell in love with, doing. What are your thoughts?
Taking care of the patients, as you said, the administrative side of things, right? And the emergency department needs triage, right? Mm-hmm. But if you can have a tool that is taking all of the blood pressure data and the other vital signs that the triage nurse collects, the patient symptoms, the complaints that brought them to the hospital, and put that into a triage system that might help alleviate some of the burden and potentially allow for some things to be surfaced faster, because that triage nurse who has 1,000 people in the waiting room yelling at her can't necessarily see the needle in the haystack occasionally for the disease that really does need to get accelerated because there's some sort of co-presenting symptom that the AI model might be able to pull out. So there will still be that triage nurse there, but supplemented with this tool that might be able to take some of the burden off.
Even before we get to predicting or diagnosing, I think the ability for this type, like generative AI in general, to administratively overcome, like the first thing you do when you go to a doctor is like fill out paperwork, collect the understanding, right? And that's kind of annoying. It's prone for failure. Reviewing records, understanding a history of a disease. There's a lot of things that can be.
I remember the last time I went in for surgery, and I had to do the paperwork 4 times for redundancy to make sure that nothing was overlooked.
Yeah, I mentioned this during our our kind of initial warm up here, but like I have a critical chronic lung disease. I've been to quite a few hospitals around the world. At one point, I had a doctor who was like nice one day and super cranky the next day. You know what the deal was? The deal was there was no coffee. And so like I was at the mercy of this physician who, just because like he didn't have any coffee that day, like his compassion and empathy was like not there. Let's go to the next slide here. And I think that's like a good transition. This came out recently, an interesting publication. Effectively, they use ChatGPT to respond to questions posted in a Reddit forum, Ask Docs, and they evaluated doctor responses against ChatGPT responses. They asked ChatGPT responses to evaluate them against certain constraints, empathy and appropriateness. Now, granted, like these are physicians after work, and there's an opportunity to okay, cool, maybe they've got less time here. They're just doing it out of the goodness of their heart answering these questions. I think it's really remarkable here that ChatGPT doesn't get tired. Like, not only do the overraters of this study sort of rate that the responses were more appropriate, better, but also more empathetic. And so, I think just like the relationship with nurses and physicians in terms of the fatigue, the reality is that, humans get tired. They're susceptible to the environment around them, and the criticality of the surrounding environment is a factor that affects care in a really interesting way. So I think there's interesting opportunities there to allow nurses and physicians to not only focus on the things that they really want to focus on, but to be able to expand and extend care in a way in which they can smartly increase the ratio of patients to nurses and of patients to doctors, or other way around, increase the ratio of patients to
better the ratio.
Better the ratio, yeah, sorry. Got to remember what the denominator is. But that's right. I'm not suggesting we don't need them. I'm just suggesting there's smarter ways to do it. And already, under this capitalistic system, we're already expanding what these people can do. I think contracting it may be a bit of a relief valve.
Moving to physicians on the side of the undersupply.
Yeah, so we don't have to listen to this guy's video. I think actually we're better summarized by the next slide. But I like this physician, and that he talks about kind of the issues that physicians face in terms of continuing to work, right? Like the pandemic affected everybody, and I think physicians and nurses and administrative staff in the healthcare world got a big dose. And so he goes on to talk about some of the reasons for physician shortages. And I wanted to bring up this AMC paper that essentially says, look, in the next 10 years or so, we're going to be massively short critical physicians. And the drivers they postulate in this article of this, I think, are able to be, like, some of these aspects are able to be reconciled by AI. So, one of the biggest things is, look, it takes a long time to train. Like, not only is education trying to be compressed, and then people just don't have the experience, they just can't see things that you get when you're actually a practicing physician. And so, increasing education, performance, and training speed is great. If you've ever had, I would encourage everyone to, ask GPT to 3 or 5 or 4 or whatever we're on these days to teach you things. It's really remarkable. Burnout and retirement is a big issue. So we have this stock of physicians, and there's this huge bolus of physicians that are retiring. And, similar to the nurses, like we're going to be faced with an increased ratio of patients to providers. And, AI may be one way to smartly increase that ratio without resulting in, more burnout or loss of the continuum or quality of care. And finally, I think the issue here is that, look, healthcare isn't really getting a whole lot better for everybody. For some people, it's remarkable. For others, definitely not. The life expectancy for the US dropped this year. That's not a good indication that we're getting better at this. So, there's this divisive split in this country between the haves and the have-nots. And, we need to think a little bit about what healthcare is. Healthcare's finance, healthcare's access, healthcare's, opportunity. And, the increasing demand on these marginalized populations needs to be addressed. And I worry about our political will to do so, but I think it's one area where I hope AI doesn't exacerbate, in terms of job loss or shifting industry focus or something that just results in fewer folks having health insurance or care. But it's a big thing and we need to think about it.
Yeah, I think this touches on what we were talking about earlier, which is sort of the right way to think about AI, or the right way, hopefully, to roll out AI, where it's not replacing people, but allowing people to do their jobs better. And so hopefully, as you were saying, it could exacerbate if we are just, replacing existing systems or automating existing systems. But that's not going to get us to better care and would allow for dropping some patients or some employees out. But if we have a way of augmenting existing processes or changing the processes when they get automated, then we can keep the people we have, make them more efficient, allow them to serve more patients, and allow them to serve more patients better.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're dealing with a crisis of what work looks like in the future. And I really hope that we're in the Star Trek universe and not the Star Wars universe, which is like this weird dystopian future filled with like anxiety, as far as I can tell. But, I think the fundamental nature of work and how we engage with our fellow humans is going to change. And, leaning into it to be a force of good, I think, is everybody's responsibility. And we can use these technologies for evil, or we can use them for good. And I think we all need to be really conscious about the ways that we can use it for positive things. Let me just talk about this slide for a second. So, we talked a little bit about training, and this is an interesting recent publication where they used a generative approach to synthesize patient data. And I think that's interesting because, obviously it can help train people. In this case, it's, synthesizing radiology data. The reality is if you can synthesize this data well enough to train a human being, you can actually automate, and we've already observed the automation of the identification and classification of things that would suggest maybe this shouldn't be necessarily a part of what the future looks like for a person, or at least, we're going to have these backstop systems in order to be able to help improve and support. So I think an interesting approach, but just also maybe a bit of a question mark.
The undersupply of patients that you mentioned earlier for clinical trials is an interesting one, especially when we're getting into edge cases around bias or sufficiency of the data set for a number of different things. So if you can, it would be better to get actual patients, but due to geography reasons or access reasons, et cetera, if you can't, at least being able to generate some data this way.
I mean, human beings are heterogeneous, right? I just remember when we cracked the genetic code, right? Like we sequenced the entire DNA of a human. It's benefited us, but it was not the cure-all for disease. And, I think these technologies are very similarly parts or puzzle pieces of a larger story and larger narrative. And, none of them by themselves, I think, are going to be a silver bullet to improving care. But I think they're part of the solution. So
the undersupply.
Yeah. So undersupply. I mean, this guy talks a little bit, and we can play this video because I think it's short and interesting.
A study published in 2021 essentially looked at the race and ethnicity of patients in oncology clinical trials. And what this data shows is that white patients are overrepresented in these clinical trials, whereas minority groups like Black Americans, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders are underrepresented. Now, why is this important? Incident rates of certain cancers disproportionately affect certain population groups, and if those groups are not represented in the clinical trials, how do we know that the treatments we're actually pushing on are effective? Let me know if you have thoughts or questions in the comments.
So this kind of brings up an interesting point, which is patients are a resource, and just like there's ethnic and racial imbalance in America, there's ethnic and racial imbalance in the degree to which people can receive care and in the efficacy of drugs, for very legitimate reasons on that side, for legitimate or difficult to reconcile reasons politically or historically in the US for other reasons. But the reality is that people are very different, very heterogeneous, and we have a significant backlog from a pharmaceutical perspective in terms of patients that we can even test for certain types of cancer. So we have an inability to access patients. So even if you flip to the next slide, even if we have what this paper suggests, which I think is really remarkable, and I loved it, in which the proteome that we know is dramatically larger, and that we can create fundamentally new proteins that can affect disease. Even if we can do this, we actually lack significant patients to be able to test these hypotheses. And if the purpose of all of these advancements is to, promote human health and wellness and to cure disease. We've got a backlog, a significant undersupply to get through. Now, there's lots of opportunities to fake data, to create data, to look at data in a way in which we can say, hey, yeah, that could fundamentally modify this disease state and sort of project out or predict the degree to which new proteins or new drugs or new XYZ could influence mechanistically the human biology. But the reality is, like, at the end of the day, you have to test it.
Right.
And still need people to do that. And so, I don't think 1 out of every 2 people, I think, has a chronic disease in America. It's a wild stat, but I think it's true. We're not running out of people to test. We're running out of ability to do so. Like on the pharma side, there's also tremendous staffing limitations because running clinical trials, if you're at an academic medical center, is like not a well-supported activity. Right? They do this for their own posterity. They're like significantly underpaid in comparison to the drug companies that then benefit from this work. And there's this whole aspect operationally that's just very, very resource intensive. And so I think in this next decade, we'll find that particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to price regulate the most expensive drugs for Medicare and others, I think we're going to find that developing drugs, not just the drug discovery side, but the operational aspects of testing, validating, determining the efficacy and supporting that process, which is billions and billions of dollars per drug, has to get better. Because at the end of the day, the drug's price is going to be regulated. And I think that's a good thing for the American consumer and the American healthcare economy in general. But I think it's going to be a bit of a pinch and a crunch for pharma. So I think pharma needs to dramatically adopt these things and think, how can these technologies help operationally impact it, not just the science. So the science, I think people understand. It's researchers who create these models, it's researchers who think of these things, but the basics are hard. Like we're still struggling with the basics.
Yeah. I'd love to talk quickly through sort of the last 2 points in your slide, which were slide from earlier, the software undersupply, and then the compelling ROI. I think they sort of dovetail nicely with each other. We can go through those.
We can watch this guy or not. Let's not. He's good, but effectively what he says is, look, every year we cannibalize aggressively the bottom 20% of like tasks we don't like to do. And if you're not in the software industry, you probably don't realize that it's so aggressive. And every year folks are a little bit worried, like, hey, the nature of my work, it's changed. I used to do this. Now I've got to do this. Well, now it's automated. That speed is going to increase. And this long-term undersupply of software, I think it's going to dramatically affect the vendor market, right? The expectations for delivering software are going to go high, but also you have companies that are large. And if they don't adopt these technologies, they'll find themselves systematically outcompeted. And in the competition, there's 2 sides to ROI, right? There's the fee, like what you charge, and there's the benefit, the cost and the benefit. And
70.
Yeah. If the benefit is low, but your product is really inexpensive, cool, you can still have high ROI.
Right.
But if you don't, if you're competing against others for whom their costs are much better controlled, instead of having a 40-person or 50-person company, you have a 4-person company, you're just inevitably more brittle on one hand, right? Like if one person leaves, what does that mean? But also you're much more flexible. And I think it may act to decrease the marginal cost of these technologies and sort of drive it down towards affordability. So that can be very, let's say, disruptive for existing players who are like, hey, I used to get $1,000 a month for this product. This guy comes along in his 4-person team. He delivers effectively the same thing for $5. What does that mean about my margin and my bottom line? And how do I differentiate myself, et cetera?
Yeah.
The business case is wild. So I care very deeply about the business case. My work at Current Health is really, in many ways, focused a lot on this type of work in data science and prediction, et cetera, but really about creating incredible value propositions. And I think the failure of paratherapeutics to really establish an ROI for payers, or at least as the CEO sort of reported, I think is a really critical example that we need to think through. And that credible measurement and the degree to which your product influences the businesses that you're selling into and their modalities, like, needs to be right on. And I think honestly in the medtech space, like, CPT codes and reimbursement is not the way to go anymore. Payers who are fundamentally underwriting and paying for care really just want to drive med cost savings and revenue in smart ways. And so, I think this
It's a big chicken and egg problem there, right?
exactly. So, I think that there's starting to be new pathways for how value or for what technologies can be integrated in with these systems. But I also think that we're kind of facing a bit of a crisis of measurement, in that there are good technologies out there that you need sufficient scale to measure. And it's really hard to be able to deploy into the right population, let alone at the right size.
Right.
And so, while the tech might be easier to create and the barrier to creating tech might lower, the biggest barrier I think is always, if it works, how much and to what degree does it provide a financial boon for the people that buy it? I think that's going away. So I think credible measurement, clinical impact, and ultimately fiscal impact are still core aspects those are going to be the people that win. You can't
Figuring out who your
product.
customer is, not just what your benefit is.
Yeah, exactly. Like product market fit is a big deal. People think about it a lot, and it's kind of like a business case study. But the reality is I think we missed it here for Pear, unfortunately. So
Great. Thank you for sharing all that background. Interesting. It was fun. I have a couple slides on just legal points to have in mind when you're working with these technologies. Thoughts to leave people with. Love to hear your thoughts on them as I go through them the same way I've been sort of doing color commentary on yours. We could have an entire multi-day seminar, and people have, on just the legal implications of AI in healthcare or in other areas of industry. I'm going to focus on 3 questions: data, IP, and some ideas around risk mitigation, just good best practices to have in place. There's an entire other regulatory component that we're not going to touch on, multiple other components. Again, just thinking about data and IP before going into risk. Generally easy to put concerns into data in and data out. Thinking through what are the different questions that you should be asking when you're using one of these tools, or when you're putting together one of these tools for customers to use. Obviously, if you have sort of the model in the middle that is doing some sort of data processing, some sort of churning on the data to generate some output, as we've been talking about today, or to do some classification with some of the tools that have been around for a while, data has to go in. And terms of service, licenses, terms of use, all those privacy policy things that people tend to skip past, all that's critical in this, including for the tools that are out there making headlines. You should be aware of what they are going to do with your data. I gave a presentation on AI, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, with a language model company, and one of the in-house attorneys I was speaking with was saying, they used to negotiate all sorts of other things in contract terms, primarily around price, when selling to a particular customer. But by 2017, one of the things that they were most negotiating was what that company could do with the data that they were receiving, and what they could do to get access to more data, because data was currency. The company was living and breathing on getting access to more data. In that case, it was data coming in from hospital systems and doctors. And so wanting to know what the terms of service say and how it aligns with your use case in particular. Some of the ones that are getting headlines right now have multiple different terms of service depending on exactly how you use it. There are ones that you can have your own special model for, and there's one set of terms of service for that. One that has a programmatic interface that software can access, there's terms of service for that, or just the one on the web that you can log into and type questions into, and to have terms of service for that. And there was a example that got headlines a couple weeks ago. Major household name electronics company, at least as the story went, as it was reported, engineers had typed in some trade secret information, highly confidential information, to get GPT's take on it. And the company was concerned because when the data goes in, now it's in and could potentially come back out to somebody else. And so they were concerned about the trade secret implications. And so just something to keep in mind. Want to make sure that you're standing up to your own obligations, your own privacy policies, your own regulatory requirements, et cetera, for what you need to be doing. But then you want to be certain that when your own property is going in, when your own data, if you're a hospital system or other data source where a lot of your value comes from having a data set, what's happening with that data set when you put it through this model. So again, it's the part that everybody tends to skip over, and it sounds easy and it's easy to dismiss, but make sure that you're actually reading these things. Make sure it aligns with how you intend to use it, not just one of the sets. Data out, similar thing, right? What's coming out of the system and how are you using it, or what are your liabilities for it? There are tools out there that generate text, and there's always a risk that the generated text is going to look like text that's on the past, because that's how these tools work. They're just really talented mimics. And it's good for something that has a lot of repetition, like medical documentation or other areas where if you see something, if the model sees something common, it can spit back out common text that corresponds to it. But there are situations with these tools where the text that was used to train it may have had some rights attached to it. And what are your rights as a user of that system vis-a-vis those original rights? And you should be aware of how did this particular tool, if you're coming in using a service provider, how did this particular tool get trained? Where did that service provider get their data? Did they abide by all of their obligations? What obligations do you have? I've seen tools that have indemnification clauses in the terms of service, and those only trigger if you abide by all the filters and checks and things that the tool makes available. And so you want to make sure that you're aware of that, plus any ongoing training obligations. You know, the feedback loop that these tools live on, so that you put data in, you get data out. If you edit the data out to be better in some way, that feedback is really important for the company. And so you want to make sure that is there an ongoing training obligation that you're signing up for? Again, just being aware of how these are used. Intellectual property is a relatively straightforward one. A lot of people ask, you know, if I'm using somebody else's model as a starting point or as a critical piece of my tool, can I get intellectual property around it? It's like any other tool. You know, very few people work with things that sprung, you know, full formed from the ether. Everybody is always building on top of something else that someone else did for developing their own intellectual property. And so just like other contexts, if you're using somebody else's model as a foundation model, and then you're doing some sort of transfer learning on it or post-training or refinements to get it useful for your case, or even if you're just using it as is, it can be protected potentially. And it's the same question of, are you doing things that are new and different? I always say for patenting that you want to consider probably the workflow that the AI is used in, because the AI itself, the model in the middle, as we've seen, you know, in the earlier slides, those things are constantly evolving. And the models that people are using in 2023 were not the ones they were using in 2022, or not the ones they're going to be using in 2024. And so it might not be something that has a lot of legs for a patent if you try to patent the model, but thinking through the workflow, you know, where's the data coming from? How are you preparing the data? What are the important features that you've realized are different for guiding some particular process? And trying to protect those as well as the outputs that correspond to one of the downstream driven processes.
With the speed of development, like, do you still think that patenting is the right approach?
So you have to be careful with it and figure out where is the value and where's the longitudinal value. Try to find the platform technologies that are going to persist across versions, which is why, you know, the input features, there's always going to be a refinement, but there might be, you know, a couple that are more informative that differentiate your product from others, or the way you tie into downstream systems and drive those systems might persist across versions. I'm very much someone who's not advocating for patenting everything always all the time, but we want to figure out what's the business strategy, and I think there is still business strategy there occasionally for patents.
Cool. Should we open it up? You got more?
Just got one last slide, and then we can open it up. I know we've got about 9 minutes left, and so I just wanted to quickly touch on risk mitigations. These risks are evolving as quickly as the tools are evolving, and so it's a shifting landscape, but I think an important thing to keep in mind, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is the fundamental nature of these tools, right? A text generation tool I mentioned earlier is mimicking what it did in the past, mimicking text that it saw in the past. And it is really good at generating text that looks like something it saw before. There's an example that I know of where somebody asked for a list of references that talked about a particular topic, just give me a bibliography, and all of those, the results that were spit back looked like actual journal articles. They had titles that looked like journal articles. They had identification of the publication that looked right, and all of them were completely fake. It looked like real text because that's what the tool was trying to do, but it was not real text. And so I saw an example a couple months back of someone trying to automatically write a prior authorization note with references for a particular patient for insurance approval. And the video was going through how amazing it was, and I just kept looking at it thinking, you've at least got to double check this because it's just it's a random text generator that's good at generating random text that looks good, but you've got to have a human to account for that randomness.
Yeah, I mean, there's a concept in the legal world, not an attorney by any stretch, but like of speciousness, in that it's plausible but wrong.
Yeah,
and I think that there's a lot of great information, like retrieval approaches that are kind of linking these things to reality, and I think the concept of hallucination will be mitigated. And in terms of like understanding where references exist within this, I think we'll find that the next versions will probably reconcile that to some degree. But it doesn't really necessarily solve the problem.
right.
So yeah, I mean, that's super interesting.
And then the human in the loop, an important thing is making sure that person feels empowered, or making sure that person understands the tool and what it can do, because I'm aware of situations where radiologists who were told to double check the AI trusted the AI over their own diagnosis because they felt that the AI was better than them, or in some way, even though the study was done and showed that the radiologists were better performing. And so want to make sure that even though you're not just putting a human in the loop, but that person feels empowered to either find the better answer. There are certainly situations where the AI may find the group of diagnoses, or the genus, if you will, but there's a better species, there's a more accurate, better answer, and making sure that you can account for all of those things, and the human is actually understanding what's going on, why the AI got the answer it did, and what the actual right answer is.
Yeah, although if that's the definition of a problem, that's a shrinking definition.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the question might then be when. Cool. You want to open it up?
Sure. One last point. Don't just release the data scientists like you on data without the data scientists understanding it. Right. Make sure that the
That hurts. It feels personal, AJ. It feels personal.
Just one last dig for you. So
I appreciate it.
Can open it up. I can see we have one question here on regulatory submissions and whether ChatGPT can write text. And I would say in general, ChatGPT, the point that I was just raising, really good at spitting back out something that it saw before. So if you want to start with that, I would certainly not then submit it without accounting for your particular, authorization space, or your regulatory space, or your business, or anything like that.
I think, I mean, I agree. I think the answer is not yet.
Yeah.
But I think the yet is a when thing. In terms of like thinking about a regulatory submission and predicate devices, I think from like a policy or research sort of history, I think it's really remarkable that we may get there. So I think right now I don't want to externalize an entire regulatory submission to it. But in terms of speeding things up, and there's a lot of framing, there's a lot of prior art that's just like somewhat repetitive. I think right now I might consider using it to accelerate it. Of course, like very cautiously knowing that these things hallucinate. Do I trust it to evaluate it yet? And then, submit it and negotiate with the FDA? Probably not. But I think, we may find in the future that, this type of document creation, I mean, look what Microsoft is doing with Microsoft 365, like Copilot, like creating and learning from an existing corpus of data fine tuning these models to do regulatory submissions. I think we may find that things may get better. The question then is one of acceptance and appropriateness and uniqueness as well. And, I think everyone has aspects of their job that are more or less, let's say, outsourceable to ChatGPT and other technologies. The question is what's the right approach now and what the right approach might be in the future? Interesting question.
Yeah, for my own, take inside a firm, my line has always been, are we, can an AI tool give me a draft that's, a first draft better than, whatever year associate you want to put on it?
I mean, it's
Is it
passed on
better
the
than
top
a first
decile
year?
of the bar, right?
Yeah.
Like GPT-4 passed the bar.
A
Like,
lot of people can pass the bar.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's, can it give me a draft that's better than the first year associate? Until it can give me a better draft,
Hmm.
I'm not sure it's saving me a lot.
Yeah.
But that's always been my touchstone when I look at these tools, because people have been talking about, automated writing of patent applications. So I'm
Yeah.
always watching that market for how can I leverage these in my practice, same way that, we're
Yeah.
talking about doing it for
I mean,
healthcare.
I'm interested in, I remember a phrase and, hey, we need to pass healthcare so we understand what's in it. Right. I forgot, when the ACA was being passed, the ability and the overwhelming amount of documentation that goes through, like these tools could be really useful for extracting it
Right.
and summarizing. And of course, it's not going to be maybe perfect in every single way, but there are definitely ways to accelerate your workflow. The question is like total externalization and, versus like a tool. And I think right now we're squarely in the enhance your life camp. But, these things are also rapidly evolving. So I'm curious. There's that like AI commercial, pizza commercial. That was
I
like
do like that one.
terrifying. So
If you haven't seen it on YouTube or whatever other social media platform of your
Yeah.
choice, the terrible pizza commercial that I would watch. It's like watching a Geico commercial.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I just can't like stop thinking about all the.
Yeah,
I mean, it was text to a commercial prompt, but there were no cameras purchased, there were no actors hired, there's no food or lights
Script
or
writer.
editor, no script writer,
yeah,
and so that's really great. It wasn't very good, but like it's wearing baby shoes. I think that
right.
there's an aspect of that that's kind of really interesting to think about what how we consume, what we think is trustworthy or not. Also, the way that food was like eaten in that was like nightmare fuel. So, other questions? Don't feel
Yeah.
shy.
It looks like, unfortunately, we have reached our time. But I would love to take a minute and just thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Greenberg Traurig and AJ and Eli. That was such a valuable presentation, truly. We cannot put on great educational content like this without your support. So thank you. And to learn more about what's going on at MassMedic, check us out on social media or visit massmedic.com. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks.
Have a great day.